Okay, I welcome members and officers to the meeting this evening. So just to inform you that following the appointment of Councillor Jill Mercer to the executive, we have a vacancy for chair of this committee, and the first item of business is the election of chair. In the absence of a vice chair, as the vice chair resigned following circulation of the papers, I'll take you through the first item and then pass you on to the chair for the remainder of the business following election. So, could I have a nomination for chair of this committee running through to the end of this municipal year?
Certainly. I would like to propose Councillor Graham Lawman.
Thank you. Could I have a second for that?
Thank you. I'd like to second Councillor Lawman.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations? Okay, on that basis, could we go to a vote, please? That's all in favour. Thank you. So I shall pass over to the new chair of the committee, Councillor Graham Lawman. Congratulations.
Thank you, Ben. And perhaps the first thing to say is to thank Councillor Mercer for her work on this committee, and wish her well in her new role. So the next thing, apologies for absence.
Yeah, I've got two, Councillor Anslow and Councillor Wilkes. Looks like Councillor Fedorovich isn't here either.
I haven't had any apologies. I've had the same two that you've had, so
Yeah.
We'll see if she turns up. Minutes of the meeting on 19th of December. I wasn't at the meeting, so has anybody any comments, matters of accuracy? No? So would somebody like to propose there? Councillor Irwin, seconded. Councillor Shacklock.
Chair,
Sorry.
could I make a comment, and this is just about apologies? This is the second one of these meetings I've been to. It's not your problem, but I've seen apologies coming in. I saw Valerie's come in very late tonight and understand she's got a migraine, but some other councillors put their apologies in a few days before. They've not sought from looking at the emails to look for the substitutes, and this is a very, very important agenda. We've got officers here that want to demonstrate to us why we want to spend money or not spend money, or have bus runs or not have bus runs, and people are just not turning up for meetings. This has to be sorted out.
I can't speak for the opposition substitutes, but I know that there's another meeting in Kettering tonight that has taken out 3 or 4 of the Conservative substitutes because they've all been asked and they've all responded that they've got another meeting. So conflicted. So, and I've had emails in good time from all of them. So yes, apologies. So everybody's happy that I signed the minutes as a true and correct record? Thank you. And next thing, members' declarations of interest. Go around the table if anybody's got anything.
I need guidance from our legal person, and it's to do with the volunteer section of the agenda. I am on Simsons Way Community Association because it's my local community centre. I'm there to give them a hand as a councillor. What is my position when that comes forward? I think most councillors are involved in their local community centres one way or another, aren't they?
I've got the same issue, but I'm sure that...
Yes, so as this isn't a decision-making meeting, I would advise you that you declare a personal interest, but that you're able to proceed.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have the same issue. I'm a director of Shire Community Services, which provides public transport facilities, and of the Hemingwell Community Centre. Both are mentioned, but again, yes, it's a personal. As Ben has said, we're not making a decision. Okay.
I'd like to declare a personal interest in Simsons Way Community Centre on the volunteer bureau, volunteer side of things. Thank you.
Thank you. So, first item for discussion is community strategy. Mrs. Purnell, do you want to... 2 of us have heard this before, but if you want to take it away for everybody's benefit.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And yes, and I am conscious that some members have heard this before. So I'll just introduce the report for those members that haven't heard this before. So this is the introduction of a new community strategy for Northamptonshire and some proposals about investment into the voluntary sector moving forward. We had intended to produce a community strategy after vesting day within my communities and wellbeing services. That was delayed somewhat due to other commitments such as the refugee programme. However, in some regards, it's quite fortuitous because the strategic landscape has somewhat changed over the last year, 18 months, and it's given us the opportunity to review what we want to get out of working with the voluntary sector closely moving forward in the light of such strategic developments as the emergence of the new integrated care system, Live Your Best Life strategy, and the development of the local area partnerships and community wellbeing forums. Obviously, the council has set its corporate priorities a couple of years ago, and we've been able to review where we are against those. And then also importantly, the introduction of the Family Hubs programme, which isn't referenced in the copy of the report that you've seen, but following discussions at two executive advisory panels regarding this strategy, there's been an ask that I reference Family Hubs because that is a key strategic development and the voluntary sector have a real role to play in the development of the Family Hubs programme. And then also things like the work that NCALC have done with town and parish councils to look at the transfer of assets and services. Now, I'll come on to that because I'm not saying that that's a key deliverable from this strategy, but some of the strategic context is laid out in both the strategy and the report. And in terms of the grants programme, so the amount of funding that's committed into the voluntary sector by the council comes from a whole range of different programmes. The main focus of this particular report is around our strategic voluntary sector grants. The current grant arrangements were all inherited, or those that were inherited from the former district and boroughs. They were rolled for a further couple of years in early 2022. So those current grant arrangements come to an end in March 24. So it's absolutely imperative now that we look at our future arrangements. We're unable to roll those further again. And in the light of all the strategic context, it's absolutely correct that we've taken time to review what is funded into the voluntary sector through that grants pot to make sure that moving forward it is looking at it through an NNC lens and is meeting the objectives set out in a number of those strategic documents. So we needed to both produce a strategy and also look at those grant agreements, which is why this report has come forward now, ready for the start of the new financial year. The voluntary sector grant pot that the report mainly references the £672,000, which is the traditional strategic grants pot that we inherited. There is lots of other funding that goes into the voluntary sector, which is set out in the report, and I think it's important to note that when as a service we looked at all the different grant pots that are being delivered into the voluntary sector this financial year, when you look at things like our discretionary small grants policy, the Member Empowerment Fund, and then lots of other funding that is also being passported through the council to the voluntary sector, that alone total £1.8 million. So it's not an insignificant investment, and that doesn't necessarily include all the other separate commissions that individual services might commission into the voluntary sector. For example, public health, I know, have some commissions into the voluntary sector as well. So there is a significant investment. In terms of looking at the future of that investment, it was rightly aligned with the consideration for the budget build for 24-25, because obviously when we're looking at what we continue to invest in, it was important to look at whether that envelope was the right envelope, £672,000. And so we did quite a lot of work to look at the different options around that, and that included withdrawing it entirely or reducing it to certain levels, and those options that we considered are laid out in the report. Ultimately, following several conversations with the executive and in particular with the leader of the council, the decision was taken that we wouldn't reduce, the funding envelope would not be reduced for the next 3 years, so it remains the same the £672,000. And so the report then goes on to set out how that money is being proposed to be spent. So one of the key elements of that is around VCSE infrastructure. Now, VCSE infrastructure, which as you'll see from the report, covers a range of support and a support offer to the voluntary sector, things like capacity building, support with bidding for funding, back office functions, etc., as laid out in the report. The legacy councils invested in infrastructure through the grants programme rather than through a contract, and overall the total amount was £58,000, which is what the current commitment is. But if you look at, or having worked in other areas where I've managed those sorts of contracts and looking and talking to the sector about the sort of support that they want moving forward, I've made a proposal and have been working with the portfolio holder to propose that we increase the investment in voluntary sector infrastructure, and that's about being able to continue to grow a sustainable voluntary sector, which hopefully over time will ensure not only that the sector becomes more financially sustainable and less reliant on short-term funding, but also that it can continue to deliver the absolutely valuable work that it does on the ground in our communities day in and day out. So the proposals are about increasing the investment in the voluntary sector infrastructure contract, turning it into a contract over 3 years, and then also investing in a small number of other key strategic priorities. And all of those suggestions have come from lots of engagement with the voluntary sector. So I ran quite a large event in September, and we've been having ongoing dialogue with members of the sector. And so those themes and what I'm proposing goes into the voluntary sector infrastructure contract has all come through engagement with the sector. Before I move on to just the highlights of what's in the strategy, the other thing I wanted to mention is around community centre funding. Obviously, it's come up in the preamble to this. So as well as the key strategic themes and infrastructure, there was quite a big discussion and a piece of work done to look at continued investment in some core funding or core costs to certain community centres. Again, those current funding arrangements were inherited from the former district and boroughs, and following quite a series of discussion, debates and looking at different options, again the executive have recommended that the core cost funding into certain devolved community centres does remain. So that will stay as part of the £672,000 funding envelope. That particular funding, though, will be reviewed on an annual basis. That's not to suggest that those community centres aren't valued. I think it just has to be in recognition that when you look at the range of community centres that operate across North Northamptonshire, a good many others don't receive core cost funding, and whilst it's not necessarily about always needing to harmonise, it is just in recognition that there is a disparity at the moment, and we need to keep that under review moving forward, and look at what the opportunities are, but also look at making sure that as a council we fully understand what the offer is across those community centres, across the whole of the North Northampton patch, so that we can make sure that any future investment that the council makes into community centres is in the right one and in the right places. So the report basically sets out that will continue as is, and those devolved community centres, as listed in the report, will continue to receive funding in the next financial year. And then finally, I just mentioned the actual themes of the strategy. So you'll see from the strategy that there are 8 themes to it. 6 of those themes directly relate to VCSE infrastructure. So themes around capacity building, back office support, leadership to the sector, leadership around key strategic integrated themes such as the Family Hubs programme and the integrated care system, volunteering, for example. So 6 of the 8 themes are really critical and will directly form part of the infrastructure contract. So the sector itself, who we are anticipating when that contract goes out for tender, will be bidding to deliver that infrastructure contract. They will be delivering on what they want, what they themselves have said that they want in terms of support moving forward, but also will be meeting the council's objectives. The 2 remaining themes that don't sit within the infrastructure contract, the one relates to the way that we administer grants moving forward, which will obviously continue to sit with the council, and that's the whole of the grants programme that goes into the voluntary sector. And then finally, there is a theme related to the transfer of assets and services into the community. Now, that's not to replace the community asset transfer policy, which has been, through various governance, been adopted by the council, but that's in recognition that communities and I would include town and parish councils in that, if they are interested and want to step forward and are looking to take on additional assets or services, then there's a process of support that I think is required to equip them to get to that point. And from a town and parish council point of view, we know that there are some that might be interested in taking on services. There's no intention to do any whole-scale devolution of any nature, but where a local council is interested, the NCALC, the Local Association for Local Councils, is keen that we work collaboratively with town and parish councils to come up in advance with a really managed process so that there's no surprises and that everybody knows the process that has to be gone through. So that's why that's in the strategy. But I just emphasise that it isn't about a wholesale devolution of any assets or services at this point. So that's a bit of a summary of the paper and of the strategy. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Oh, it's on. Right, thank you. Through the chair. You have actually pointed out that there is no harmonisation yet, and that at the moment Corby have 10 units, Kettering and Wellingborough have other units. Within East North Hants, we are completely left out of it, and even if the town and parish councils wished to get given them, we haven't actually got them to be given. That's the first point. The second point that struck me reading it through, and I did go to the opening session actually at Kettering to find out what it was all about, youth was mentioned a great deal, and there isn't any actual mention of youth in this document. And a lot of us in the area, I think we're aware that youth is an area it's needed. Youth centres, youth groups, youth encouragement, anything that gets the youth off the streets so that we see less antisocial behaviour. I'm hoping that will come up into it. I'll stop there because I appreciate other people will have questions. Thank you.
Yeah. So the disparity around community centre funding, that's why I raised it, because it is acknowledged that is an issue, and I think as a council we need to keep that under close scrutiny and look at what the future options and opportunities are for that. It's not an easy one to solve, because whilst we could say wouldn't it be great to level up and provide the same level of funding to all community centres, that becomes an issue of whether A, it's the right thing to do, and B, affordability. But absolutely there is absolute recognition that there is disparity in the way community centres are funded currently. In terms of the youth offer, so whilst it is raised by the sector and by others, we know that it is an issue. The reason why it didn't rise to the top of because there were many themes that could have been funded, and the reason why it didn't rise, or one of the reasons it didn't rise to the top, is that there is actually another strategic piece of work going on in the council, being led by public health colleagues, and working with the children's services that are developing the Family Hubs programme and other stakeholders across the area to develop a youth offer and to look at investment opportunities in youth services. And I use that term really broadly because I don't necessarily mean traditional youth service offer, but that piece of work is going on. And the amount of funding that this particular, this £672,000 could impact on that is quite minor, because I think we're looking at a much bigger piece of work around youth services, which I'm sure will be brought before members in due course.
Councillor Bengali.
Yeah, and I can see there's a lot of work gone into this report, and I do understand the amount of work officers put into this service, especially the volunteer service, which is absolutely massive. But it's also important because most of the people involved in things like community centres, bowling clubs, community transport, things like that, they're all volunteers, and without them we'd be lost. And while I hear what Councillor Coleman's saying about East North Hants, we have to remember, well, you may not have community centres. A lot of East North Hants has village halls, which are similar to community centres in one way or another, and some do get funding from the parish councils. I'm not saying they all do, but some do. So there is some similarities there. Looking at the report, I just want to make comments on one or two items. One of them is in relation to point 416, and it's to do with levelling up areas. And for people living in Colby, we've seen quite rightly millions of pounds spent on the Kingswood estate in that area. How do we demonstrate that we've made meaningful progress in that area where the money's gone in? Have we spoken to the local councils? Have we spoken to the local groups to say, look, we've put this money in, we've done this work, are you quite happy with it? I spoke to a local councillor from Kingswood before tonight's meeting, and she said she's had very little feedback. She said there's a lot of work going in, Mark, but very, very little feedback on how things are performing. In relation to 5.9, we do have a statutory duty, and it's important. We don't have a statutory duty, but it's really important that without community centres, we'd be lost, and without the volunteer bureau sector, we'd be lost. You're talking about a new infrastructure contract, and that's going to be in from September 2024. How far are we on to that? Because September 2024 isn't very far away, is it? And before the end of this meeting, it'll almost be upon us. Looking at the costs you put forward for how much it costs to run community centres and how much grant they're getting, I noticed that you haven't put in the costs of the ones owned by the council. So you said that Beanfield Centre costs £11,000 a year, but we've got all these ones that run by the councils where we haven't got the costs. I'm just wondering why that is, because there'll be a cost there. And I always remember the argument put when we used to have the community centres in Colby, they had managers, assistant managers, people working for them. They all got taken away. And what you had was you had the volunteers running them, and then most of them just employed a caretaker or two to help clean the building and take the bookings. It's really, really important that we engage with the local community centre people. You've got a lot in Colby, Kettering, Wellingborough, all over. When are we going to start talking to them? You're saying the funding's ending at the end of 2024, yeah? Or the funding will be looked at the end of 2024.
Yes,
let's put
review,
that
yeah.
correct. Yeah. So when will there be a dialogue, a discussion with representatives from all the community centres? Because what we can't have is a situation like a few years ago when it was announced that all the funding would be cut, because there was a lot of people that were going to put the keys to the community centres through the letterbox of the council and say, you run them. So it's really, really important that we have a meaningful discussion with all these good people that run these community centres, who are all volunteers. And that's about it for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Pengelly. I was just getting the report back up in front of me, because I'm sure the cost to the council of the in-house community centres is in the report, but I will just find that for you. But in the meantime, I will cover your other bits, and then I'll check that. So yeah, completely agree about the impact that the whole VCSE has, and the reliance on volunteers, and that's why at the moment, because the infrastructure arrangements are quite, aren't, let's say they're not particularly robust, although they are there, the new contract will have a real focus on support for volunteering, both in terms of recruitment, retention, support for volunteers, and support for all the organisations that are using volunteers. So we will be building that in. In terms of levelling up, so it's not really subject to this report, although obviously the levelling up agenda is a strategic context for this report. There is a separate report coming to executive next week as well that talks about the progress against the levelling up action plan. But it's a really valid point that you make about how are we actually demonstrating impact. So whereas the report at the moment talks about the progress around a whole range of themes in those areas, I think it's a really good point, and you're not the first person to raise it, about how do we do more work to ensure that we're looking at what the actual impact is of that investment and ongoing activities and future activities in the levelling up area. So I think that's a point well made, and one for us to consider moving forward. I can't remember what I've written down there. Oh yes, the infrastructure contract. So what we've done through all the engagement with the sector is we have, and through the development of the strategy, is that we have basically the bones of the tender specification document that will go out. So my priority, as well as focusing on getting the strategy approved for adoption, is to sort out the new grant agreement, so have a market event with the sector on Wednesday to discuss the new grant arrangements for next year around the strategic themes, and to make sure they've had an input in what those grant agreements seek to achieve. Once that is done and the strategy is adopted and we can get those grant agreements moving along, the next big push is to get that tender specification out to market. I will do a market engagement event with the sector on that as well. But we're working closely with legal and procurement and are confident that we will have it in place by September at the latest. In terms of, I'll come back to the bit about the cost, because I'm sure they're in there, but if they're not, I'll find them later and let you have them. But in terms of engagement with the community centres, so whilst we haven't done a routine engagement so far with all community centres across Northants, we have done specific engagement with those devolved community centres that are in the report, where there was at one point there might have been a potential to say, would we reduce that core cost funding? So all those community centre managers have been spoken to, and the feedback that they have provided is contained within the report. If we were to do a further piece of work to look at community centres across the whole of Northants, then obviously further engagement needs to be undertaken to get a fuller picture. But in terms of those 13 that are listed in the report, they have all been engaged with. And so whilst I can't get it up in front of me, but in terms of the core costs, I know it came up when we discussed it at CLT, so I have included the costs to the council of running the in-house community centres, which largely sit in Kettering at the moment, because the ones in Wellingborough and Corby are devolved and are listed anyway. There is also, in addition to that, some capital repairs and maintenance costs that we have in relation to the devolved community centres, and that is in the report. But you'd have to, when I can get it up, I can reference the paragraph that it's in, but it is in there. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I'll just pick up a couple. When you say disparity between them, do you mean disparity between NNC runs? Do you mean disparity between NNC runs and what we'll call the devolved ones, or between other? I mean, obviously, a lot of town and parish councils have got halls. They may not be called community halls in parishes, village halls and whatever. So, just where is the disparity? I was going to pick up the outcomes things, but all of the outcomes and the themes are quite strategic and high level. So presumably there will be other documents with specific outcomes for the sector to achieve to ensure that we're getting value for money.
So thank you, Councillor. So in terms of disparity, I think it's sort of all of the above, really. So if you look at, so some are in-house and some are devolved, so there's a different operating model there, and then some have, were either managed by town and parish councils at one point, have been devolved to communities by, so NNC has no involvement. And then in terms of all of those, so if they're in-house, clearly there is a financial cost to NNC to deliver those in-house services, in-house community centres. And then for the devolved community centres that are listed in the report, whilst they're devolved to a community organisation, those ones that are listed still have an element of funding from Northants Council, whereas there will be other devolved community centres, for example in East Northants, which receive no funding from Northants Council. So there's a disparate picture across the piece with community centres. Not sure there's an easy solution to that, but just acknowledging that there is. So in terms of outcomes, so the strategic grant themes that we're developing to go into new grant agreements from the 1st of April, there will be some outcomes attached to each of those. So they're in draft form and they are being discussed with the sector. So there's an open event on Wednesday that members of the sector that are interested can come and speak to us about those outcomes, and then they will go out in expressions of interest, and the organisations that want to get involved will then have to step forward and say how it is that they can either work singularly to deliver those outcomes or collaborate with another organisation. And then the infrastructure contract, that will be a full open tender, so there will be clear outcomes to be achieved to that contract when it goes out to tender.
Anybody else? Councillor Irwin.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. It's been very interesting for me. It's all really quite new to me, and I might ask some naive questions now. I hope you'll tolerate them. First of all, can I just point out a couple of typos where, in both cases, where zeros are missing from amounts of money. So 5.1 under Household Support Fund 4 and 5.10. I think it means £200,000 for the contract, which is what I want to ask a question about. In my innocence, I assumed that if a community centre or a charity wants some money from the local authority, they phone someone up and say, we need 10,000 quid, and you say, what do you want it for? And we give a reason, and you say, yes, that fits with our strategy, here's 10,000 quid. It's probably not quite as simple as that, especially when I started reading that you're going to have a VCSE infrastructure contract. Now, what will you require the contractor to do? I see that it says about advancing the strategic aims of the authority, but what in practice does that actually mean? Are we talking about they will assess requests for money, they will handle issues that successful applicants have? Can you say more about that, please?
Yes, of course. So the VCSE infrastructure contract won't be about the grant giving. So in the strategy there are 8 themes. So 2 of the themes sit outside of the VCSE infrastructure contract, one of which is around grant giving. So grant giving will continue to be administered by the council officers on behalf of the council. So for example, we have a number of grant pots that we administer currently. There's well-defined and adopted policies and processes around that. So for example, the small grants framework, which are grants up to £25,000, we run that as an open application process 3 to 4 times a year, depending on how the money is distributed. They have to fit within certain criteria around delivering health and wellbeing, health and equalities benefits, for example. Organisations, we publicise when those rounds are open. Organisations can bid into that funding pot. They fill out a form. We do, as officers, a certain amount of due diligence on that just to make sure it fits the criteria and that they've not been funded for the same thing previously, because we don't want to duplicate funding, for example. Once that due diligence has been done, a report is written, and then there is a member-led oversight panel that finalises the decision around where the funding goes. So members make those decisions, and we replicate that for most of the funding pots that we deliver into the sector. The strategic grant agreement, so this will be the first set of new agreements that we've done as Northampton Council. So when those grant agreements, when those expressions of interest come in, when the new project briefs go out to the sector in the coming weeks, again, those applications will come in, and there will be a similar due diligence and a similar member oversight of the decisions about where the funding goes. In terms of the contract then, which isn't about the decisions on funding, the other themes in the strategy which relate to support to the sector, they will be the contractor or contractors, because I am anticipating a collaborative bid coming in from the sector. They will be responsible for delivering all of the other 6 themes within the strategy. So, for example, there might be a requirement in there to develop a programme of best practice and training and support for volunteering. So that might be about supporting other members of the voluntary sector to have really strong volunteering policies, to make sure that they can recruit collaboratively, that volunteering opportunities across Northampton are posted somewhere that everybody can see, that there is a brokerage service behind that, so that once volunteers say, I'm interested in this, somebody's looking at it from the sector and going, well, we know that all these opportunities exist because all the voluntary sector are saying these are our current volunteering opportunities. That's one example of what that infrastructure contract will deliver. But there's a range of other things, from leadership training to the sector, to providing capacity and people, if necessary, to help. One of the things the small organisations tell us is that they know there are funding pots out there, but they don't have the time, they don't have the capacity, and don't have the skills to be constantly writing funding bids, particularly for bigger funding pots that are delivered nationally. And so the contract part of those providers will need to make sure that support exists for the sector moving forward. That's just a couple of examples. There will be many others, so I hope that helps.
Sorry, that's really helpful. Thank you. My other question is, I mean, the voluntary sector, as Councillor Penkelly has said, the work that people do is just incredible, and I believe from a strictly financial point of view, a few pounds given to a voluntary group probably gets us better human value than money spent by a council or by a school or by another public institution. So it strikes me that just a bit short of £2 million actually doesn't seem a huge amount for an authority like ours. I was wondering, how does that compare to other similar authorities?
That's a good point. We haven't done specific benchmarking, but we can do that. And I know that the 1.8 is not the whole amount when we looked at all the commissioned contracts as well. I know, speaking from personal experience in other authorities that I've worked in a similar size, this is a larger amount of money than I've worked with previously, apart from infrastructure, which isn't where it needs to be currently. But I think, moving forward, it would be, as we review this funding moving forward, it's a useful piece of work just to say how does it fit with other like and similar sized authorities. I think it's a really positive message to the sector that the funding envelope is not reducing. And whilst I'm sure everybody in this room and beyond would like to see it increasing, we obviously have to, there are difficult decisions to be made about where funding is spent. So positive relationships with the sector, lots of engagement, and that will continue. And I think the new arrangements and the new infrastructure contract gives us a real opportunity to keep working with the sector moving forward.
Councillor Coleman.
Thank you. Through the chair, very simple question. There's 168 members through Kettering and Corby, and there's 200 across Wellingborough and East Northants. You've mentioned you can look at it and say, oh, they do that, so you've got an actual directory. Will the general people that are organising it in the voluntary section, for example, if in Rushden or Higham or Oundle they wanted to start a group, would they have access to know who runs what groups to give them a benchmark and help?
So yes, so any organisation can join the network. So the current networks which are listed there, we would hope to see those continue through the new infrastructure arrangements, because at the moment the current infrastructure organisations support the delivery of those VCSE networks. But we need to promote to make sure that all the organisations know that those networks exist, and then also know the support they can get through those networks moving forward. The asset mapping that you've sort of alluded to there, which I think is mentioned in the report. So we've been doing that asset mapping through the new local area partnerships. We have recently launched an asset map which has gone out to the voluntary sector, so it's not public facing at the moment, but all the different voluntary sector organisations can see that asset map. And whilst an asset map is a bit of a point in time and is based on the information that people provide, it's a really good snapshot of lots of different physical buildings, services and offer in the community. We want to continue to work with the voluntary sector through the local area partnerships to keep populating those asset maps. And then over time, we want to see how do we make that public facing. It's not at the moment, it's more of a tool for stakeholders in the communities to use. Obviously, there's no reason why members can't use it, once it's fully up and running. And ultimately, we need to find a way of making it more publicly accessible. But that's an ongoing piece of work.
Thank you.
Any others before I have my...
Yeah, will there be a report coming forward on the family hubs, which is separate but also involved in this? And just to put some sort of perspective on this, in Chester House, as we know, absolutely brilliant facility, serving one part of Northamptonshire. No other people can get there, but the running cost of that, I think, is £380,000 a year, something like that. I've got some figures, but yeah, when you look at this, 14 community centres, the running cost is £106,000 a year for this council to run 14 community centres, with everything that goes on in them community centres, from youth clubs to all-day pensioner groups to warm spaces to karate to kung fu to boxing. What a great facility we get. as a council for so much little money. I think it's absolutely brilliant. I'd say well done to North Northamptonshire for funding them for that small amount of money and them doing what they do. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, they do excellent work, and the community centres are able to bid for other funding. So whilst the core funding costs are listed in that 106, I know that many of those community centres have received lots more funding from the council over recent years, particularly around warm spaces you've talked about, but some of the other small grants, but and not just those 30 community centres, other community centres have bid into that as well, because they do a really valuable role. I think it is a small amount of money for a big return. It obviously they deliver something quite different to what Chester House delivers, but I take your point that the point you were making was that it's a really positive investment. Family hubs doesn't sit directly within my area, but I would imagine that when there is something to bring forward to report on family hubs, that report will be coming forward.
Go on.
Can I ask what your involvement therefore is in the new community space hub, whatever it's going to be, because none of us are really too sure on Grosvenor House, because that'll be costing the council more money in revenue each year, and every time you ask about what's it going to be at the end, nobody knows. And I'm just wondering what your department's involvement is in that, because there'll be a cost to us going forward.
So there may be other people in the room that know a little bit more about it than I do, but in terms of my involvement and my services involvement, we obviously, because we are, my services provide a really strong link to the voluntary sector. We've supported the messaging going out to the voluntary sector through the networks around the opportunity that Grosvenor House, or whatever that hub becomes called in the future, offers, because my understanding is that there is an opportunity for voluntary sector organisations to come into that building as a bit of a one-stop shop. I think the idea is that a lead voluntary sector organisation would come in and then would bring other organisations in to use the space as a one-stop shop. From my perspective, we've been saying that it links really nicely with, for example, the work of the Place model and the local area partnership and the community wellbeing forum in Corby, and we'd want to make sure that organisations that are linked to the LAP have an opportunity to connect with that space. And we also see it as an opportunity for the voluntary sector, and when I say the voluntary sector there, I also mean our cultural voluntary sector services that have quite a strong footprint in Corby, have the opportunity to showcase some of what they do in that space as well. But in terms of the actual commercial arrangements and the leases to the voluntary sector, I don't know whether George wants to say any more about that.
Through you, Chair. This was, in terms of the multi-use building, where we're up to with regards to that is at the last Town Deal Board meeting. We agreed, I think you sit on that as well, Councillor Pengelly, we agreed that we will be advertising interested charities, not-for-profit organisations who would wish to show their interest as a potential tenant once the renovations are complete. So that was advertised, or that process started on the 6th of December, runs for 10 weeks, and will conclude on the 14th of February, and then obviously a further report will go back to the Townsdeal Board after that date. So that's currently where we're at with regards to a potential tenant for that site. So we're just ascertaining the level of interest from different interested parties, arts organisations, voluntary and independent organisations. So hopefully that helps. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Have we all? So I might as well, I'll sum up at the risk of repeating myself. I'm really pleased to see this report and welcome it. Everybody involved in the sector has been nervous about April 24 and what happens, and this gives them some certainty, and particularly helpful that they can use it for core funding, which is the most difficult thing to get anyone involved in communities knows. Again, at the risk of repeating myself, there were no changes been made to this report from when it went to the Prosperous EAP. I assume that's a timing issue. So forgive me if I just reiterate some of them. nothing's learned until you're fed up of saying it, is it? So, we've spoken about the outcomes, communications, along with the youth stuff. I made the point. I think more needs to be made of communications, how it is going to be communicated. 6.7 in the themes, there's a mistake. It says 671. I'm sure it means 471. The situation in 5.16 with the Hemiwell hasn't changed yet. We're still sitting on the lease. It hasn't been done. I think the report could make clear in 5.25 that the 53,000 is additional to the 670. And also in page 31, where it talks about empowerment funding, I think to make the point that empowerment funding can be used for things outside this as well. It doesn't just have to be used for things for the VCSE, though it obviously welcome to. It'd be interesting to, and some new points that just come up, to know whether any thought's been given to the new community centres in the new SUs at Glenvale Park and Priors Hall and Hanwood Park and Stanton Cross, because they're all getting new community centres, and I'm not sure how they're all going to be run, but they may be things. And you mentioned the asset mapping, and yes, I think it'd be a good idea to let councillors, when it's appropriate, know where it is and how to find. On the 671, one of the things that we always complain about, there's no inflation link in it, that money's soon eaten away if if inflation goes back up again. So I'd hope the executive look at that. I understand the financial pressures, obviously, but I think we need to look at it. I think that's probably the most of the points. Others were made before, but that's fine.
I'd just say that because it's been to a number of places so far, that there is a master copy where all the amendments have been made. So by the time it reaches executive next week, all the changes that have been commented on will have been made. But because of publication times, I wasn't able to do that ahead of this meeting. So.
I assumed that. Okay, so we've got some recommendations on page 13 to approve it for adoption with any changes that might be necessary, and to approve the framework. And in fact, I suppose we're recommending it to executive. Is everybody happy with that? Yes? Splendid, thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much for the... You'll get it absolutely spot on by the time we get to exec. And next we have item 6, bus service improvement plan funding. We have Mr. Ragg and Mr. Douglas with us to take us through it.
Right, thank you, Chair. Let me introduce us after you. Danny Douglas, on my right, is the Council's Principal Public Transport Officer, so he's the one in my area who's actually doing a lot of the work on this and may know the answer to some of the detailed questions you ask. So to start with one of the basic bits of background, which is something I think if you went out in the street, certainly when there were more people around, and asked them how bus services run in England, the majority would not know how they do, because the majority of people have always thought that the council is responsible for the buses, and that has never been true, apart from areas that had large municipal bus operators. So the majority of bus services in England are provided commercially by the operators, which means essentially they choose when, where to run the service, how much to charge. The council has the power to supplement that with subsidised services. It's a very strangely worded, because we actually have a duty under the 1985 Transport Act to provide such additional services as we consider appropriate. So once we've decided to do it, we have a duty to do it. But if we decide not to, we don't. That can be an important subtlety. It's against that background that at the start of the COVID pandemic, obviously people were told to stay at home and not travel. Bus services would have stopped completely if government hadn't stepped in and supported operators. So key workers, particularly in hospitals, but other key workers could actually get to work. So government stepped in at that stage with emergency funding, which the majority of that was paid directly to the commercial operators. A proportion was paid to local authorities to make up for the loss of revenue on our subsidised services. It's sort of against that background that about a year later, in March 2021, the government published the National Bus Strategy, which was backed with significant extra funding, looking at how you would actually grow the bus market. And it's worth saying that would have been a very different thing if that had been 2 years earlier, before patronage had gone down. Because in March 2021, we were still in the really quite early days of people being encouraged to go out again, really. And we didn't at that stage really have any idea where the new normal would settle in terms of bus patronage. But in order to be able to access the funding linked to the National Bus Strategy, the council had to do two things. Well, all councils, or all local transport authorities, had to do two things. The first was to publish a bus service improvement plan by the end of October 2021, which we did. And the second was to either form an enhanced partnership or introduce bus franchising. And even actually, if you were saying you're going to introduce bus franchising, you would have had to introduce an enhanced partnership in the interim. So we formed an enhanced partnership, which is a statutory relationship under the Bus Services Act 2017, under which the council has committed to do certain things for a period, and the bus operators has committed to do certain things for a period. It has to be said, a heavily caveated partnership, because a huge number of the things we would have liked to have done were dependent on us actually getting government funding to do them. In terms of that government funding, a large part of the Bus Service Improvement Plan was effectively setting out our bid to government for how much funding we would like to have. And unfortunately, in common with probably the majority of local transport authorities, we didn't receive any funding in the initial round, which was slightly dispiriting, so we say, having had to put an awful lot of work into that. While bus service patronage has recovered significantly, it's still only at around 90% of pre-COVID levels, and it's particularly noticeable that it is the concessionary pass holders who aren't travelling enough. Not enough, as much as they were previously. Fare payers are quite close to, fairly close to normal or pre-COVID levels, but it's particularly the concessionary pass holders who aren't. And one of the difficulties is, given we're now 4 years from the start of the pandemic, is that just because there's a new generation of people who've come along who've never got used to using their bus passes, maybe never applied for one. Very difficult to know the exact reasons for that, but that is a common sort of statistic across the country. The government, because of some of those reductions, the government had continued to provide support to the bus industry at a reducing level. And in May of last year, they announced a new longer-term funding deal, because a lot of, up till then, the industry had been supported typically on 3 or 6 month funding deals that were very often only announced just before the previous one ran out. And that significantly changed the mix of funding. So instead of the majority of funding going straight to operators, a much larger proportion would come through local authorities on the basis that we could decide how what the network that was commercial could be supplemented. And Northamptonshire, as a result of that, received or has been allocated £569,412 of Bus Service Improvement Plan Plus funding, as it's called, for both this financial year and next financial year. And we took a report to executive in September last year that laid out our policies our plans for how we would spend that money. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Then in October, the government announced that there would be even further funding for buses in the North and the Midlands as a result of the money that was being reallocated from HS2, and the council received a further indicative allocation of £2.045 million for the next financial year, 2024-25. So that's on top of the amounts of 569,000 we'd already got. What that means is that our funding to potentially support subsidised bus services, and because this is all revenue funding intrinsically, goes up from 438,000 last financial year to, sorry, I'm reading the wrong table, goes up from £380,000 last financial year to 955,000 this financial year, just over 3 million next financial year, and then while government has said there will be further funding, we don't yet know what that is, so the only allocation of funding we have for the following financial year is back to 385,000. It's slightly bigger than the previous year. So that is a real challenge with how you actually spend revenue funding, because the sorts of things that you do with revenue funding, you introduce a bus service, if there's no more funding, you'd have to withdraw it. A lot of other things you'd do. We could do a fare scheme, but you'd go to an awful lot of effort to introduce that scheme, work with the operators, and then have to remove it if there's no more funding. So that was very challenging. How do we actually look at spending, and even initially, the two amounts of 569,000? Because one of the challenges is that we haven't in Northamptonshire seen the level of commercial service withdrawals as a result of the drop of patronage that have been seen in a lot of other areas. So I know, for example, in Cambridgeshire, there's a lot of rural communities that had lost their bus service, or were going to lose their bus service if nobody stepped in. We haven't really, in Northamptonshire, seen any community lose its bus service since the start of the pandemic. What we've seen is the frequency of services go down, and we've also seen some people lose key links, so particularly from some areas of Corby to Kettering General Hospital has been a particular one we've had a lot of correspondence about. But, we've not had the same challenge, which actually makes it even more, it's good in one sense, but it makes it quite difficult. How do we spend the money? So in looking at actually how we would spend initially the BSIP Plus money, we said, well, the first one would be, because if the government support is switching from the operators to us, that means the operators are going to get less income in. So what this process is creating is a process where you would expect that operators are going to have to withdraw some commercial services because they're getting less income in overall. And so the first thing will be to use the funding to continue any existing service. The second thing we came up with, which is partly what the National Bus Strategy was aimed at, certainly what the funding's aimed at, was to look at where is there a good chance that we could use this money as seed money to actually increase commercial services back to the frequency they'd been before COVID, or closer to the frequency before COVID. And, hopefully we can fund them for long enough that they will become commercially viable at that increased frequency. And the third area of that funding was where we've actually got developer funding coming along for extending services into new developments. And to be honest, one of the things we did purposefully not do during the COVID pandemic while travel was suppressed was introduce new services like that, because you were just going to be turning the tap on and the water was going to go straight down the drain while nobody was travelling. So where we've got that Section 106 funding can we use the BSIP funding, put that in sort of 24, 25, and then use Section 106 funding to carry on services after that, which helps to give longer for the Section 106 funding to try and establish something commercially viable. Because one of the challenges with a lot of developments is that they build out very slowly. So, although you're going to have, you might have, say, a 3,000 house development, that at the end, when it's all built out, should be able to sustain a viable bus service. Actually, if that takes 15, 20 years to build out, it's very difficult to get the bus service at a sustainable level in the early days. So that was very much our initial approach, but also, in some ways, added to that is the fact that with the promise of more funding, is it worth taking a little bit of a risk on that, in terms of how ambitious we can be in restoring services to some of the rural areas, where, we know it is a political priority of the council to improve the bus services in rural areas. How ambitious can we be, and how can we look at what we're doing already with subsidy money to actually use this as a means of getting some of those services introduced, and how many of them we will be able to continue to fund. So that's what we've been doing an awful lot of work on, and there is an appendix at the back of the paper that sets out the proposals that we're coming up with. What we've also been, two other things that we're doing is the government has issued new guidance on the calculation of reimbursement of bus operators, which will essentially increase the rate at which bus operators are reimbursed, because the principle is that if they're reimbursed, so they're no better or worse off. So if there's less passengers, logically you reimburse them at a higher rate because there's less traffic generated. And the other two key things, we've also submitted a zero-emission bus regional areas bid, as it's called. Quite a mouthful when you say it that way, but I'm sure that's to come up with the acronym ZEBRA. They came with that, which was to introduce zero-emission buses on the X4 corridor between Northampton and Peterborough, so passing through, Wellingborough, Kettering, Corby and Oundle, which carries just below 25% of all the bus passengers in Northamptonshire. And we're waiting for response for that. And also, a few weeks ago, the government asked us to submit an updated bus service improvement plan to them in accordance with new guidance by the 12th of June. So we've been thinking, how do the timescales work for that? Thank you, Chair.
Is that it? Okay, Councillor Shacklock.
Thanks, Chair. I'm sorry, Kerry, if you've heard some of this before, but I'm from the frozen north, and I have got a concessionary bus pass, but we haven't got any buses. We haven't had for a long time. This was well before pandemic. I'm from the Thrapston ward, by the way. There's nothing between Oundle and Thrapston, and I see that you're, somebody's proposing that there's a bus goes from Oundle Rawns and to Rusden Lakes. I assume that will stop at Thrapston as well. Is there any provision for it to stop en route as it goes through to some of the villages that are on that route?
Yeah, very much so. So yes, it's all the regular stopping places. So we'll be going down the valley, and we're looking at Titchmarsh, Barnwell, and all the regular stops that was the case with the old 24. So yeah, and coming to Thrapston at that critical time, which we've talked to Thrapston Town Council already for some pointers to get people into Rushden Lakes. So basically, what's worth remarking about the service is that it is building on one of the biggest flows in the county, which is into Prince William School. And part of the attempt, part of the strategy, I suppose, is continuing what we've always been doing, which is putting some scholars traffic on the commercial bus network. and also it gives them more opportunities to use the service for after-school activities and see friends and stuff like that. And we really hope that that's going to try and make the service more sustainable than it's ever been before, as well as the Russian Lakes link.
Can I come back, Chair? Yeah, that's great, thanks. Just to clarify, when I read through, it just says it was Mondays and Saturdays. I mean, I assume it means Mondays to Saturdays, and that's fine. Is there any provision going forward to feed in from the very rural areas onto that bus route? I'm thinking really of things like Call Connect in the past.
So part of the exercise, and I was out today talking to community transport operators, is after the network review, what we saw is we have a bus fleet that is, we have 41 big buses running around the county delivering local bus services, and actually we need a more appropriate bus fleet because in rural areas smaller vehicles make sense. And so part of the thinking when we're going to the market to test is for DRT, demand responsive solutions. And the work we've been doing in the background is trying to get the community transport ready, operators ready and geared up to participate in that. And lots of them are very keen on it through what's called Section 22 operation. And fundamental to that is the idea that you might feed into something, because with the X4, which is an excellent service, for instance, going through East Northants, is we want to support that, what the commercial sector's doing. And so, there's a role there for DRT to feed into the services that are already established.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Just one more small point. There is a demand bus coming to Barnwell to Oundle this Thursday. So what you're telling me is to make sure they fill it. Is that right?
Yeah, Carr's running that bus, isn't he, from Commonwealth? And yeah, had a chat with him today. So he knows about these opportunities and he's thinking about, how he can adapt his operation around them, or to bid for them as well.
Councillor Owen.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, it's great that there is such a lot of funding available from the cancellation of HS2. But I was wondering whether this money is very specifically for buses, because there are other ways of moving people around, people who may not be able to afford a car or may not be able to drive a car for some reason or another. Technology is improving. Obviously, there's voice scooters, there's people's personal mobility scooters that I don't doubt that very soon you'll be able to call up a car, an electric car on your phone. It'll be driverless. These are all other possible means of public transport. But is this money very specifically for the old-fashioned buses?
It is very specifically for buses.
But what we want to bear in mind is what constitutes a bus is what we're trying to develop. So it is very different. So, and the Section 22 operation means that that's under 16, it can be under 16 seats and a vehicle that's more appropriate, but it will be a local bus service. And that means it will be on all the information platforms and you can use your concessionary pass. So it has all the benefits of a smaller vehicle, and it also has the benefits of being a bigger bus, if you like, as well.
Councillor McGilly.
Yeah, we must be very pleased where we can see in many areas of North Northamptonshire there are zero emissions from buses. The problem is there's no buses going to several areas of North Northamptonshire and people feel let down. I don't know if it was a throwaway comment or what. I'm just trying to understand when we talked about S106 money, which is really important to funding of buses, because what you said is we haven't bothered looking at that since COVID. I don't think you meant what you said, because really, S106 money, I'd like to know, because you've come here today, how much money are we talking about that we could get put into this scheme from S106s? Because I know, for an example, Geddington Road, where we've got the big 3 new super factories, there's S106 money for that. That estate is finished. I have been sending emails to our planning department for the last year saying, why are there no buses running here? We've been given the money, and what will happen in a few years' time? We'll run out and we'll lose the money. And this is really important. How much money have we lost by not doing schemes in the past? And how much money are we going to get on this? Now can we join this and marry this together to get even better bus services, so Councillor Shacklock can get the buses he needs and I can get the buses I need?
Yeah, thank you, and through the chair. Just to clarify what I was saying, and I'll give an example. It was actually an example in West Northamptonshire, but just before the pandemic struck, we'd started a new service between Brackley and Bicester. It was doing very nicely for about 6 weeks, and then everybody went away. We all thought at that stage the pandemic was going to be over in a few weeks. And we carried on running the service. We reduced it to hourly. In retrospect, we should have just stopped it and then started again. So what happened in a scenario like that is that the majority of the money was spent while nobody was travelling, because you weren't getting the income to offset against the costs of running the service. So that was the challenge we faced. It's not that we've not looked at this. One of the challenges we've had alongside all these, which I didn't mention in the report, is that for a variety of reasons, including somebody being seriously ill as a result of COVID and somebody else leaving, is North Northamptonshire didn't inherit anybody on the public transport side from West Northamptonshire. It's not that they were much better off, because they'd got one person who wanted to retire and has stayed on out of duty more than own desire. But yeah, we've actually had to rebuild the bus team so that we actually have people in post to actually look at these things. That has been one of the challenges. I don't think we've really lost very much money. I'm not as a result of not starting those services. There are some monies we've lost. There's one in one of the smaller towns where we'd got some money to improve a service that the county had then taken the decision to withdraw. So we couldn't then deliver that service. You can't enhance a service that isn't there. So there are those challenges. But if I say that the total funding package that we're looking at for this, including all the contract extensions, is 5.2 million. That's not using all the government grant funding at the moment, as we've worked the numbers out. Now, this is all at this stage hugely subject to what the tender prices come back at. But we're looking out of that 5.2 million, 3.6 million of that is Section 106 money. So, that is hugely what we are looking at using. Sorry, no, I'm reading the wrong number again. 1.9 million of that is Section 106 money. And there is, one of the challenges, so if I just take, some of the areas, we've considered in this, like Priors Hall, Weldon Park, they're still at a relatively early stage. There's some areas of Priors Hall we can't run through yet. We can't have the eventual service in Priors Hall because the roads don't exist that we'd actually need to run down. So we need to make sure, we don't want to use all the 106 money for a site like that in the first couple of years. We've got to make sure that we allow that money to be available over a reasonable period while the service gets established.
We're doing an overview of 106 monies, and there's a lot of monies that we don't know. I don't know, anybody else sat on that committee the other week when we had the meeting? We don't know where the bus money is, where it's being spent or whatever. Could you bring a report to that committee? I'm going to ask the chair of the committee if that could come forward, because it's really important we see where that money is being spent and whether it's being spent correctly. If you've come to a meeting tonight, said a figure, I'd like to know how's that dissected so that Councillor Coleman can say, well, that's good because that's from my area. It's what we all want to know as members. And we've all got these big urban schemes in our areas, haven't we? Thank you.
I was going to say, I've got a similar comment. It says in 5.4 it excludes Section 106 funding. And I'm thinking of, just as Councillor Pengelly, Glenvale Park, where the owner is desperate to get a service. Not that he said how much money he's got for it, but because the 106 wasn't written very well. And we've got Standard Cross, Hanwood Park, no doubt, and all these places. If we're going to forward fund, that would be interesting to know more. And I mean, some of them will obviously benefit the further parts into each town. I think, there's a bus service, it says in the report, that was removed from Redwell, understandably, because not many were, there wasn't much patronage, but a bus to Glenvale would take it through the areas that lost their bus, naturally. So I wonder what progress they've made on either forward funding or spending some of this 106 money.
Right, thank you, Chair. It is a very mixed thing, and one of the challenges we have in Glenvale is an example of that, particularly in some of the larger developments. The 106 is principally written that the developer enters into a service level agreement with a suitable bus operator to provide a service. And we've been having some ongoing discussions with the developer, because we were saying to the developer, the sensible way of doing this is to run the service so it goes down the route of the service that Councillor Lawman was talking about. It will pick up extra people en route, in addition to the small number of people who live in your development, and take them into the town centre. The developer said, no, nobody wants to go to the town centre, everybody wants to go to the railway station.
That's right.
And we then have done some surveys with the developer, which has resulted in the result that nobody wants to go to the station. Not quite everybody wants to go to the town centre, but the place most people want to go is the town centre. Those discussions are continuing. To be honest, one reason they're not continuing at the moment is Danny and the team are working on all this, because this is a huge number of services to be letting in one go.
Okay. Councillor Coleman.
Can I pick up on something that Councillor Pengelly said, actually? On the 106 monies, if, say, for example, an amenity space can't be positioned in a place that you want it to be, it can be moved into another area of convenience. Can a bus route be moved? So if a bus route isn't required in the area that the SO6 monies are being given, can it be moved into another area? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes, I get what you mean.
Thank you.
The basic thing is what we can do with the money from 106s depends on how the 106s are worded. So we have one 106, I think it's West Hill in Kettering, which has a wording something like to strategic bus service improvements on the west side of Kettering. So that's fairly broad, You get others that are, for improved bus services serving the development. You get others that are very more specific and say to provide a half-hourly service between this point and this point, via this route. So it very much varies, and we've even had in the past where the bus operator has renumbered a service since the 106. At one stage, we used to put the number of the bus service in 106s. We have had developers saying, the bus operator's renumbered it, we don't have to pay anymore. So, which is clearly was being a little unreasonable. But so what we tend to put now, if we do quote a number, it's or any equivalent future service to try and do that. But some of them are very specific. So one of the challenges in doing this is is that Danny and the team have been through and looked at where are the services which we can link 106 with, and importantly 106 we've actually got. So some of the 106 is still to come, and there are other things there. Thanks.
Okay. So a few other points. In 2.2 in the report, it talks about the report going to the exec in September, and I just wondered if any. There's no specifics in the actual recommendation that went through. It's all very general. So my first point, I wonder if any has actually been spent other than what we're talking about. Secondly, we haven't really talked in 2.3. We talk about this 2.045 million that we'd be given. Really would have been better as capital, wouldn't it? Because we could have gone and bought some buses or something. and you quite rightly point out in the report that having it for 1 year, you won't get all the routes sustained. You can start all the routes you like, but they won't all be sustainable, and they'll all fall away in the second year. So you haven't really given us any indication what your thoughts are on that. Previously, we've had information on on the split of the levels between concessionary repair fares and the fare paying. You said that we're up to 90%, but I mean before it was like 75 and 58, wasn't it? So I don't know what the split is now. We talked about Glenvale. Also, some other things. I wonder there was a project. I'm going to be a bit parochial, which as everybody will be. There was a project to redo all the bus stops and the bus change in Wellingborough and Church Street, and that local government reform put a big dent in that. I just wonder if that's been picked up again. I'll make the same point about Kettering General Hospital. I think you have to take about 3 buses if you want to go from Wellingborough to Kettering General by bus. If I look at the Appendix D, which is the suggested routes, I think it's a big opportunity missed, to be honest with you, particularly with demand responsive transport. I mean, you've picked the area that was the old Call Connect area, presumably because you can just ring up Call Connect and start up again. But there are many, many other areas that were crying out for something. All the villages around, Wellingborough, Kettering, Corby, and are all crying out for them. And I think there's an opportunity there that should have been looked at more deeply. The suggestions on the W1 and W2 to increase, I'm not sure the demand is there for an increase, and I wonder whether the money was better spent on those, reinstating the W3 or W4, particularly the W3, which we've had protests, people lying in front of buses and all sorts of things going on for that route, and that is an area of deprivation that just doesn't have a bus. I'm sure. Another thing, the industrial estates on the edges of our towns, all the 4 we've got, not one bus goes through them, and I suspect it's pretty similar in some of the others. You'll continually get people saying that their staff have difficulty getting to work, and you'll see HR directors saying we can't get people to come to interviews because they can't get there. The Voy bikes have helped in that respect, but often that's I saw the W8 is going, but you're going to restart that, so that's good. I wondered, with the £2.50 thing, has that made any difference, any difficulty for either new operators or current operators to start new routes, because they've got nothing to compare against and to use for getting the subsidies? And how difficult is it when you've only got really one operator? And we've got Whippet doing a couple of routes, but basically we've just got Stagecoach everywhere, and we're too much beholden. You'll be aware that Councillor Coleman from Rushton, that Rushton Town Council are paying a quite enormous sum of money to replace what was a rather strange cloverleaf fixed route with a demand responsive service, and it is picking up, but so it is not. And one of the things that the county council did, we'll all remember, is got rid of the subsidy policy. And I'm still wondering to see whether a formal subsidy policy has been done, because that determines the balance between urban and rural and so on. And we've waited 3 years and haven't seen anything on that one yet. And I understand the difficulty with staff, because I was at the coalface, as you might say. So there's a number of points there.
All right, thank you, Chair. If I just deal with that one first, because I haven't written that one down, so I'll do it before I forget. One of the challenges almost is with this level of uncertainty of funding, it's actually really difficult to come up with a cogent policy, of what we would do in the long term. That's one of the challenges. And so in some ways we've been approaching this more, these are the things we'll do. Working down the list, in terms of the funding for how much we spent in 23-24, we will have spent 22,000 of that funding well, actually not technically, I think just in this financial year. I think it's before the 13th of April. And that is basically a couple of routes which Stagecoach surrendered some commercially, where we've put short-term arrangements in while all this work was going on, and we're deciding what to do in the longer term. In terms of the 2.045 million, the reason it doesn't set that out in detail is we're still trying to work that out. The bus shelter scheme is certainly, interestingly, if something's been designed up, obviously it's capital, which is slightly more challenging, but actually if there's something designed up, would Victoria be like to know about that?
Victoria would certainly know about it. There was a discussion, and Errol was gone now, isn't he? There was a discussion about where to put the stands, whether the back of the pavement or the front, but and differing views, but that hasn't come back. But,
yeah, I mean, I very much take the point about the W3, the W4 and the industrial estates, and I think that's we can certainly have a think about that. One of the challenges is there are things like that, and potentially some of the other services about Wellingborough, where if we had more certainty of funding for a longer period, I think there are other things we would certainly have looked at doing over that. But we still have money to spend. The problem is sustaining it. In terms of the £2.50 fare, I mean, the overall thing, the bus industry is getting, I think, concerned that people, the longer this, the £2 and £2.50 maximum fare goes on, the more people will forget what they used to pay. And when suddenly, instead of paying, £2.50, they're paying £4.50, they'll go, the fare's nearly doubled, forget that it's actually been halved for the last however long it will be by then. So the bus industry is getting concerned. And actually, it is one of the financial challenges for introducing new services like this, is the fact that we will only be able to get £2.50 for those fares if we allow our services to participate in that scheme. We will not, at the moment, effectively, if an existing bus operator would have charged £4.50 and is now charging £2.50, they can get the government to make up the difference, essentially. It's a lot more complicated than in the forms. I know some small operators just went, no, we can't make sense of these forms, we're just not, it's just not worth it. But one of the challenges is, when introducing new services like this, we will only get the £2.50 that comes through the fare box. So that in one sense helps to, in the short term, that helps to spend the government grant in terms of how much so we're getting the money from government in another way, but once that funding runs out, if that sort of thing is still in place, it becomes more challenging.
okay. Sorry, Mr. Douglas wanted to come in.
So just some of your points there. There's nothing more foremost in our mind than the fact that we've got 1 year's funding, and what we don't want to do is disrupt the market, put up home to school prices. We don't want to do that, and that's why we approached operators to understand what they thought would become commercial in a short period of time, and these are the services that they've identified. So we're putting the operator right at the beginning of that conversation. At the same time, we're going out and trying to find more operators, trying to broaden our supply. And that's why I'm saying the development work we're doing with the community transport operators is working towards that, but also some of the home to school providers that are big bus operators, we've gone and talked to them as well. So there are two things that we're trying to do is, not disrupt the market, but try and grow the market and grow supply so it's sustainable over the long term. And some of the points, the specific points you're talking about was, for instance, the bus shelters at Wellingborough. The other side of the coin here is about the maintenance contracts, and that's a piece of work that we've been doing to include those shelters in the maintenance contracts going on, because that we're going to try and coalesce all the arrangements from the predecessor authorities together. So that's something that's happening there. And you talked about some of the services. I mean, I think with the Wellingborough services and W3 and W4, the reason it's not on the list is because Stagecoach didn't put it on the list. Our first priority, because of the enhanced partnership, is to work with the operator to get something that they think is sustainable and viable. But we will be coming back to it because of Glenvale, and so there will be a lot more work in Wellingborough. The conversation I was having today with Shire was around possible DRT work based at Rushden Lakes, and so in much more at that side, not just the old Cool Connect areas. So where it says where we got DRT Frapston, we were talking about south of Frapston and that area there. So I think you're right. There's much more opportunity there, and some of the synergies where CT operators have got vehicles available which are smaller at times when they may be more appropriate to use. That's what we're exploring.
Yeah, I know that I was talking to Earthlingburgh as well and other. So I mean, there are real bases to explain, but I would be a bit disappointed if we could only put services on and improvements on that were dictated by a commercial operator and not by the needs of our residents as we would want. And Glenvale won't help the W3. It helped W4, but it wouldn't help the W3. And frankly, that's probably the one that is was top of my inbox, much more than the W4, which is my own division. So that's anyway. Councillor Pengelly wanted to come back in.
My final point on this, and it's to do with the spread of money. You mentioned 380, then 955, then 3 million, then back to 385. One of the worst things that we can do as councillors is provide something for someone and then take it away, because they'll all be shouting and screaming saying, you put this new service on, now you've taken away. Why don't we look at the 3 million year, spreading that even further, so that it's not all spent in 1 year? Because you didn't say that. You said it will all be spent in 1 year, and that would make more sense and have a good bus service. If you'll remember, Mr. Wright, with the Corby Star bus service, I think it was absolutely brilliant, worked well, and people were using it because it was frequent, the buses were clean, and it was absolutely brilliant service. But then they took it away, and so less people then use the buses. And I just think that if we're going to do something, let's make sure that it may be less routes, but make sure the routes we put in won't be pulled away after 2 years, and then they're going to be shouting and screaming at all us, won't they?
Yeah.
Thank you, through you, Chair. The challenge we've got is the funding conditions attached to the government grants. That's basically the challenge. It is possible for me to say to the government, this 2.045 million you've given for me for 24-25, I would like to spend half of that in 25-26. There is a process that allows me to do that. The risk of doing that is they may say no, and therefore you can only have 1 million. That's the challenge that we've got to face. And so it is, it's the same with asking them, can some of it be capital, which is again allowable, but the wording is, we're not really very happy, because I think part of the problem is they would have to go back to the Treasury and renegotiate the funding. So, that's one of the challenges, but it's certainly not. When I first saw that, please let us be allowed to spend, because normally revenue funding we can spend on capital, not the other way around. But no, it is quite clear you cannot spend it on capital without special permission. So the funding terms and conditions are the real challenge for it.
Yeah. A couple of things. One of the things. There's no costs associated with all the things in Appendix D, so we're not sure. But I just wonder what counts as revenue. If you give it to a bus company to run a service, you gave them all 2 million and said, run this, but we know you're only going to spend 300,000 a year, or whatever it is. Is that allowable? I don't know. I don't know. I haven't seen the wording. So.
there are things about ensuring that we're spending it in a way that is value for money. Yeah, and there's all sorts of funding conditions that actually make it, I could think of excellent ways of spending it that wouldn't be value for money. Because of the, all these challenges. And so it's an interesting problem to have.
It's a conundrum. So, Mr. Douglas.
But just to addressing your point specifically, our approach in what we're trying to do here is trying to extend really the Section 106 payment for as long as we can by using the BSIP Plus. So we're working them together because we do want to spread all the monies we've got out for the longest possible period. So it's that way round we're kind of doing it.
Okay, any other points? Okay, well, we've got a couple of recommendations, or a recommendation. Turn back the page. So to note the contents, okay, fine. The proposal to note the proposal to develop. So obviously we're still at an early stage, and I think it has to be said that this may have to be something. I'm sure something that we'll be interested in looking at again. And update on the plans, although they're not really formulated, I have to say. Consider the areas that members have asked a number of questions. I mean, there's not a date for another report going to exec, is there? In this? No.
So, Chair, no, we're still considering that. Possibly we're thinking about June, but... Yeah.
So I think all we can say, we've made our comments on our various individual ones, and for the bus service team to consider and adopt or not. Are we happy with that? Yeah? All happy? Yeah. Splendid. Thank you very much. It's interesting to have money and not be able to spend it, isn't it?
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we come to the last item, surplus assets disposal. Now, the officers have asked that this actually be withdrawn because the exec have asked to re-look at some of the detail in there that they weren't happy with. I am subsequently assured that it will be redone in time to come back for the 27th of Feb meeting, therefore will be with us before the exec meeting goes to, and I received that assurance, and Mr. Candler's nodding. However, if there's any comments we want to make before they rewrite or not update the policy, then I'll take them, and Mr. Candler can pass them back to Mr. Wadsworth. Are you happy with that? Yes. Go on.
Very happy, Chair, but just to reassure members, so this will not go to exec until it's gone to scrutiny first. So we're aiming for the end of the month, as Councillor Lawman has quite rightly said. If we don't hit the end of the month, then we'll still ensure that it goes to scrutiny before it goes to exec. So we have to put in a special, like we've done for this one, then that's what we would do. So just to reassure members, you'd see it before it goes to exec. Thanks.
Councillor Pengelly was first.
Yeah, Chair, I was disappointed that this report was in exempt. The report could have been written in two different ways, where there could have been, looking at the report itself, finance is a very, very small part of the report. We could have taken out one or two parts of the finance report. It's important to the people who live in these areas to know why we may be selling off the family silver. And all they were going to get was an exempt report, and I think they'd be upset. So I would like it to be coming back in two ways, where the bulk of the report would not have the financial part in, and then there could be an exempt report with the finances if you deem that is not in the public domain. Looking at the finances, I think that there's nothing there that should be in the public domain. Thank you.
Yeah, the base report was open. It's only the appendices that were.
Yeah.
And presumably we could redact the values and put them in separately. Okay. Councillor Irving.
Sorry, I just want to check that I'm just looking at. Was it emailed? It was emailed. Okay. Is there any reason why I've had the same issue in planning. What's on the modern.gov link, because I'm paperless, is not always what is on the actual papers. Is there any reason why it's not the most up-to-date version on that, or is it because it's a restricted document?
There is a private modern.gov as well as the normal modern.gov, and I think you probably have to look at the private one.
Okay, maybe
I mean, Ben will.
maybe someone can show me how to do that at some point.
Yeah, I'll look at your access rights and make sure that you're, and I'll probably over a Teams call we can have a look at making sure that you're.
I appreciate things were emailed out. I get that, but I tend to look at the app first. That'd be great. Thank
we'll
you.
Look at that with you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're all content with that. It will come back, and maybe some others will be added to it. Says he with a knowing wink. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. There is no other business. There's no work plan on here, which surprises me somewhat. There's nothing in the work plan. And I know it gets agreed by the Scrutiny board, but there were a number of things on the list, so it would have been good to see what was coming up and to have an opportunity to discuss it. There's nothing on there.
We'll bring that to the next regular meeting on the 27th.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everybody. You've gained 20 minutes of your life.